Boatworks Today is a viewer-supported show. To learn more on how you can get involved and watch extended ad-free versions of these videos, please visit our website, boatworkstoday.com, and click on the top of the heading where it says Support This Show. Thank you. So, welcome back everybody. I hope you're doing well. My name is Andy with Boatworks Today, and this week, now that I've had some time to play around with this Coosa, I want to share some of the things that I've learned, what works and what doesn't. So with that said, let's get started. Now, in case you're not familiar with this, Coosa is essentially, it's a fiberglass reinforced foam panel, and it can be used in a number of applications from decking to bulkheads and whatever. In my particular situation on this Bertram project, I'm primarily using it as a substitute for plywood. Now, in the past, I've mentioned that I like working with plywood, and I do. It's a very time-proven material, but it does have its issues. I mean, nothing is perfect, right? So for this project, I wanted to try something new, mainly because I was curious. Now, typically my approach when I'm looking at doing like a repair or restoration type project, more oftentimes than not, I take a very traditional approach, just because, well, it's time proven. But I also need to be open to the idea that, as technology gets better and new materials come up on the market and just new materials just kind of evolve, I need to be open to the idea that, sometimes the traditional materials and the traditional approach sometimes may just be, well, maybe a little bit outdated. So that was one of the main reasons I wanted to try Coosa for this particular project. So now, when you're looking over Coosa's website, they say that this material can be worked with standard woodworking tools, like jigsaws, routers, skill saws, maybe even a table saw. I haven't tried that. I don't know that I want to. And I agree with that. I think that's perfectly accurate. But I would put a little bit of an asterisk on that, though. While the tools themselves are perfectly capable of working the material, standard woodworking blades and bits, not so much. I mean, you got to remember that this is a fiberglass reinforced panel, and there's a lot of fiberglass in here. And just standard blades, whether they're high-speed or hardened steel, standard blades just don't hold up at all. Now, just as an example, this is a standard woodworking blade. This happens to be a Bosch. It could be any brand, but it's a pretty good blade. I've been very happy with this, working with wood. Now, this one's brand new, and then this is a blade that I've used. I think I got through about 4 or 5 feet, lineal feet of just cutting, and all in through here. This is like a butter knife. It's just completely worn down, almost perfectly smooth. So basically what it comes down to is that when you're working with this material, essentially carbide is king. Whether it's carbide tipped or actually solid carbide. Now, last week's video, I did a fair amount of cutting when I was basically fabricating the parts for the panels for that helm modification thing that I'm doing here. And a fair amount of cutting there. I want to say I did about 25 lineal feet of cutting with using a jigsaw. And this is the blade that I was using. So the brand is actually, it's a Hitachi. And basically I just went with this because honestly it was the only one that I could get short notice. But this is a 6 tooth per inch carbide tipped jigsaw blade. And if you look right here, it actually says that it's meant for cutting fiberglass, or specifically fiberboard. Now, that's the packaging. Here's the actual blade that was used. Focus. After about that 25 lineal feet of cutting. And it doesn't look like, there's a little bit of wear along the edges here, but the teeth themselves, absolutely perfect. Not even worn down in the slightest bit. Now, I am sure that there are other brands other than Hitachi that makes these, carbide tipped jigsaw blades, but I gotta say I'm very happy with this one so far, and it's held up well. But in particular, what I also like is that it's a very stiff blade, and that's kind of an important deal, especially when you're doing any kind of rounding cuts or radius cuts. A lot of times, especially when you're working with thicker material, what tends to happen is that the bottom of the blade will kind of have a tendency to flare out a little bit, and that's just no bueno. What that leaves you with is that when you're looking at a cut, the edge isn't going to be nice and square. It's going to be kind of tapered off like this from the top to the bottom. And that just means you got to come back, do an extra step of putting it on something flat and trying to sand that back plumb. So having a good stiff blade, especially carbide tip when you're working with this material, game changer. So then last week, after I got the panels cut out, I transferred them over, kind of attached them to some plywood templates that I had made that were the actual true I guess, shape and size of what I needed. Now, when I was cutting these out using the jigsaw, I didn't try and cut to the line. I cut close, but I oversized them just a little bit because I was intending to use a router and a flush trim bit to come in and really kind of dress up the actual shape of each of those panels. And when I was doing that, the router, or I should say specifically, the bit that I was using is made by Whiteside. And this is a solid carbide upcut spiral bit. Again, made by Whiteside. If anybody's interested, I'll try and get the model number in here. But this was a little bit of a pricey little booger here. I want to say that this bit was about $110. Why are you not focusing? There we go. And I got to say, after I had to go around the panels 3 different times, roughly 60 or 65 lineal feet of trimming. Because the first time I went around, I was trimming just the bare Coosa off of the plywood template. The second time after I had laid down the fiberglass on one face of the Coosa, then I had to trim the excess fiberglass off of that, flip it over, glass it, and then trim the other side. So roughly, like I said, about 60, 65 feet or lineal feet of trimming. And I gotta say, while this bit is showing a little bit of wear, I mean, not a whole lot. I mean, it was still cutting fantastic. But I can feel on the edge here that it's a little worn down. Not too bad, but it's a little worn down, but it's still working. But like I said, after 60, 65 feet, lineal feet of cutting, this is pretty impressive. I suspect this bit is going to most likely be able to take me through the rest of this project. Well, maybe not. I may have to get one more. But even still, yeah, that's pretty impressive. If I were to try this with a standard, a high-speed or a hardened steel router bit, I don't think I would have gotten halfway around one panel with just the bare Coosa. So, yeah, it's a little pricey, but it seems to be holding up. Now, what I do think is something that is helping on that is how fast I'm running the router. Now, I'll get into the router here in a minute because that's another big consideration that I made when I was trying to decide if I even wanted to do this or go down this route. But the speed of the router that I was running was roughly half speed. It's a variable speed router, and it goes from, say, 1 up to 6. Now, I don't know how that translates into actual RPMs, but I was running this at half speed, so I had the dial or the speed thing set on number 3. So roughly half speed, just because I didn't want this bit to get hot. Once the blade gets overly hot, then it really starts to dull quickly. So half speed, took my time going around, and like I said, it seems to be holding up really, really well. Speaking of routers, this was something that I went round and round on for quite a while, because honestly, I wasn't sure that I even wanted to go down that road of using a router for trimming this off. Well, I guess on one hand I did, because I knew that was going to be the fastest way to do it, or to meet the end goal. But on the other hand, if you've ever worked with a router, you know that they are just absolutely notorious for just making a huge mess. And I mean, again, keeping in mind that we're trimming fiberglass here. I mean, this isn't wood. I mean, although wood does pose its own health risks, I consider fiberglass to kind of be at next level. and the last thing I wanted was to have fiberglass dust and whatever, I mean, literally floating around the shop for weeks, if not longer. I mean, it's fall time here in Wisconsin. I'm going to be in this building now pretty much every day for the next 6 months. So I want to try and keep the air in here as clean as I can. But honestly, given how much trimming I'm going to have to do, not just on those panels, but with this project in general, I knew that having to use a router or something along those lines was something that I was just going to have to do. Otherwise, this project is going to seriously take forever. So this is a router that I went with. Now, before I get into this, I just want to make this very clear that this is not any kind of a paid sponsorship, anything like that, not just for the Festool, but also the same goes for the Whiteside or the Hitachi blades I was talking about earlier. So just want to knock that one out of the park right now. But the router that I went with, it's the Festool, it's the OF 1400. And at first it just looks like a standard router, right? Well, one thing about Festool, and again, I as much as I like them, I understand that this may not always be in someone's price point, but depending on how much you're going to be using it, at least in my situation, the cost of this was easily justified. But the thing that sets Festool in this particular router, I guess, apart from all of the other routers that I've seen and that I owned, is their focus on dust collection. Now, this is just one part of the equation here as far as their dust collection, but this is, if I can get this snapped in place, what this essentially does, and it locks on. I mean, it's very, very solid. But what this does is that you hook up your vacuum to here, and it creates a pretty strong vacuum or suction right in here, right on where the bit is cutting. And especially, given the bit that I was using, being an upcut spiral, when it's cutting, it's taking the material and lifting it up into this chamber area, and it just, as soon as it comes up in here, it's just gone. Now, I did mention that this attachment here was just one part of the equation. Now, another part that you can attach on here, which makes a big difference, is attaching this little guy. And it doesn't look like much, but it made a pretty significant difference. And it just snaps right in on the plate here. So the way that this works is that when you're cutting, that little black shroud hanging off the bottom of the router here, it essentially rides against the edge of whatever it is that you're trimming, and it focuses the airflow from the vacuum right where it needs to be, which is right at the cutting edge of that bit. And it literally caught every little speck. I mean, no lie. I mean, here's my initial reaction from the first time I used it. There isn't a single speck of dust on the floor from this. Not a single speck. Holy moly. Well, this all of a sudden just became a whole lot more fun. I would say that when I was running this router with this in place, as well as having the vacuum attached, I would say I have no way of quantifying this, but I would say, just based on when I was looking over the video, I'd say it caught probably 98, 99% of all of the dust completely. I mean, very, very impressive. Now, when this was off, I would say that it was still very, very good. Not quite as good, but I'd say it got maybe 90%. Yeah, I'd say that's about accurate. I'm looking over the video. There were still some little pieces. They were mostly larger chunks, though. There were still some little bits of glass that just kind of fell down. But as far as catching all the fine fiberglass dust, it seemed to do a very, very good job with just this. And just real quick, the reason I wasn't able to use that lower shroud when I was trimming the actual fiberglass is because, well, it was getting caught on the actual fiberglass. And honestly, if this thing didn't do what I was hoping it was going to be able to do as far as the dust collection, I wasn't going to use it. But it did, and actually quite impressively. Now, one thing, I guess this is kind of a recurring thing or a theme that I harp as much as I can is, just safety. Safety in general. When you're messing around with dust, specifically fiberglass dust and even wood dust, you don't want to take that for granted. I mean, especially with fiberglass. Once that stuff gets in your lungs, it ain't coming out. So again, being in here, someplace where I'm going to be working on this material pretty much every day, indoors for the next 6-7 months. That's something I need to be very, very conscious of. And when you're working on your projects as well, that's something you should be very, very conscious about. Now, am I saying you need to go out and buy this router? No, absolutely not. But being very, very conscious and being good about wearing a respirator if you're working out in say in the garage or a wood shop or outside, whatever, that's something you need to be very, very conscious about. And because you don't want to deal with the after effects of long-term exposure to this kind of stuff. So overall, what are my thoughts about working with Coosa? Honestly, I like it. I do. It's easy to work with. It wets out uniformly. You can use any resin that you want. You can use poly, vinyl, epoxy. It's a flat, stable material, sheet good to work with. And if you've ever had to work with warped or twisted plywood, you'll understand what I mean about that. Having a nice dead flat panel, makes life so much easier. But the one takeaway here is that you have to use carbide tipped blades or bits on this. Nothing else is going to hold up to it. Now, the only downside I can find with Coosa in general is it's a little pricey. I mean, it's not cheap, but it is one of those things where I do think that you get what you pay for. I mean, it's a very high quality product. And depending on what kind of projects you're doing, I think that it's probably a coring material that would be better than really anything else out there. Not necessarily for every single aspect on a boat, just because, well, at least for myself, cost would be a little bit out of range for me. But for certain areas, I guess critical areas or areas where there's going to be a lot of deck fittings, again, transoms are one of the things that people use this most on. Anything like that, I think Coosa is a very, very good option. I guess kind of look at that old adage of, buy once and cry once, right? So with that said, I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, hit that thumbs up button, and if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button, and the little notification bell. I have noticed that it is making a difference. So thank you if you're doing that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave those down below, and as always, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching. See you next week.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.